to step to the side for that. Good afternoon. Welcome. We are right at 2 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. I just noticed our podium is exceptionally tall, so we're going to step aside to this. My name is Lee Patterson. Drs. Nancy Kwong and Luann Lawson are joining for this session. If you're in the right space, we're going to be talking about advancing faculty, particularly teaching faculty. And our title is Learners Are Advancing, but Faculty Are Left Behind. And let's talk about an IOP for teachers. We have no disclosures pertinent to this at all. Our focus today is going to be looking at some common problems, challenges to promotion or advancement, and we'll talk about kind of the advancing of faculty outside the context of traditional tenure. We definitely will address that, but really thinking about how do all of our educator faculty advance. We're going to take a minute to think about what are some appropriate solutions and maybe walk you through how we might approach helping a faculty member advance. We're going to discuss strategies, and we're going to analyze 1 to 2 CVs and say, how would we help address this faculty member there? Before we get started, if I could I get a show of hands? Is there anybody here who is senior faculty, full professors, division chiefs, chairs? Awesome. Welcome, welcome. Okay. How about junior faculty, people who would say, hey, I'm 5 years or less out? Okay. And then I see some folks who are either in the middle or not really good raising hands, and all that's okay. Excellent. Excellent. All right. Quick second. Take a minute to shout out large group. What are some conundrums? What are some challenges? What are barriers, frustrations to educators? And I'm talking about people who might be clerkship directors or participate in clerkship, residency, assistant residency, some other area of teaching medical students. What are some barriers to getting across the finish line and advancing? Scholarship dissemination. Scholarship dissemination. Administrative burden. Lack of time. Time. Yes. Yes. What do you do with your time? How much time does it take you to do the administrative role if you have a designated educational role? And then does that role and that contribution of time, is it recognized and reflected in the guidelines you're using? Anything else?
Lack of clarity.
Yeah. All right. We'll take a look at that. A couple of things to think about. One of the things I tell young faculty, anybody really, the very first step to this is, do you know your guidelines? Sometimes I am surprised when I sit down with people, and I should tell you, my background is in faculty development and then residency education, and currently I serve as a department chair. But I would, in faculty development, sit down with people who had not looked at the guidelines from their department. Maybe you looked at them when you got hired, maybe you didn't, but hey, you're going up for promotion or you're thinking about it, and now we look at the guidelines. First and foremost, you need to know what you're supposed to be getting advanced towards. You can't hit the mark if you don't know what that is. If you're looking for a starting place or you're in a nebulous place where maybe you don't have really clear guidelines or benchmarks, SAEM can be a great place to take a look at that and to give you some expectations across institutions, but it isn't necessarily for whom you get guarded against. You get judged against what your own institution has. You need to be very clearly aware of what are your implicit and explicit requirements. How many of you work at an institution where the guidelines are intentionally vague? Couple of hands going up. And by that I mean they leave it open to interpretation by seniors, right? To look at this and say, this is what we believe is academic, scholarly, and contributory. Do you have that? So what are those implicit things? What are those explicit things? Does your institution recognize non-traditional dissemination? How many people come from an institution where a podcast would be acceptable quantified output on a promotion guideline? Great. How many of you come from a place where only peer-reviewed, benchmarked guidelines with a nice H factor are important to you? Yeah. So thinking through, those are the very first step is what is the benchmark? We'll talk about that a little bit more in the meeting. But one of the things we think about frequently, we say frequently to young faculty, everything you do matters, but everything that matters does not count. And this is about what counts. So we'll talk about scholarship for a second.
I'm just going to stand over here. So when we're thinking about maximizing scholarship, how many people have shown up to this meeting and either looked at a poster or an oral abstract or something and said, wow, they presented that as an innovation, but I've been doing that for 3 to 5 years, right? Okay, so I'm glad I'm not the only one. That's very validating in that moment, but I feel like I've spent a career with that type of experience. And so one thing I would really encourage everyone to do is think about every time that you do a project is really think from the beginning, how can I turn this into a scholarly approach? Because if you don't think about it, then you end up in that place of I've been doing this for a decade and someone else is actually the one presenting it as an innovation. I think additionally thinking about how you build on the existing challenges, at least when I started my career, I thought about, oh, these are things that either I was interested in or someone else was interested in, or it was a resonant project. But if I didn't have the passion around that, or it wasn't really a problem, it ended up frequently as a box of a manuscript or data in a box underneath my desk. And so, but things that are really significant problems, it's really an opportunity to think about how do I build on this? It's the burning platform for you. So I've spent much of my world in the UME space. And so for that, it was becoming the clerkship director, having, needing to build a curriculum, I needed a SIM case for something, and really thinking strategically about how do you change those things into scholarly activities. And if you can align that with the institutional need, then frequently you can leverage resources that you might not have otherwise been able to get. The other thing is, as you're here at the meeting, I'd really encourage you to look around the room. Who are you sitting with? Who are you talking to? Who are your collaborators going to be? And it doesn't always work as well when they're your best friends. Sometimes actually having that external accountability, people that you feel comfortable, that you're not comfortable enough with to say, I can't meet my deadline this month for whatever writing my section, that is really a powerful motivator. And so think about not only sort of who are your great collaborators, who do you have a shared interest with, but who gives you enough distance and a little discomfort that it will make you cross the finish line with that. And that's why the meetings like this are great, because you can find people with shared interests. You can have that motivation to really keep things going. And again, thinking about from your institutional perspective, whether it's traditional or non-traditional, whether that's going to be acceptable. I feel like there's a train in the room that I wasn't aware of earlier. And then I think one of the things that we all have to be careful about is thinking about what the projects that we actually finish, and they're really all the way finished. I personally have 2 of these in the very moment of manuscripts that are done, that they have been rejected by someone, and they need to be sort of repurposed and rebuilt. And I think everybody talked about time already as an impediment. So how do we find the sort of energy, the vigor to keep things going so that it doesn't become just another project that we've done all of the work for but haven't gotten the credit to move forward?
All right, for some of you are at institutions where your packet, whatever that form that takes, will give a lot of opportunity for you to articulate and explain to others what you've done. You want to take advantage of that. Your narrative will not look like, and the path you've taken will not look like what it looks like for many other people. If you're at an institution, you're going to ultimately be headed up to your provost, your chancellor, your board of trustees with someone from the Department of History. Your journey may look completely normal to us here at SAEM, but it might not look normal to them. This is the place to sell it. You need to articulate your achievements and then articulate how they connect together very well. I think it is a great opportunity for you to assert your impact, what impact you've had, because it may be very much in academics, but not necessarily visible to other people. I think when you're doing this, I cannot emphasize this enough, promotion, tenure, advancement in rank, all of that's guaranteed or granted by your institution, right? Not your discipline, not your specialty, not us. We are your tribe, but we are not your audience for promotion and advancement. And it's very, very important to know that. To whom are you speaking? To whom are you asserting outside? All right, for a good chunk of this, we want to walk you through an exercise and an example of how you might sit down with yourself and a mentor if you're seeking to advance this and kind of resurrect where you are, or if you have been tasked by some other administrator above you to help a junior faculty member begin to sort of regroup, think, and advance. So what we want to talk about is how do you make a plan to do this? First and foremost, again, you need to know what your guidelines are. Have you identified who they are? What are you moving forward with? What is your deadline? If you are not on a tenure track that has a clock, what are your deadlines, and are there any other associated deadlines with that? When is the file due? When is the decision made? And then what has to walk back from it? I really recommend people have a unique, specific coach in the process. If what we're trying to do is get a faculty member to be able to advance, we would assign a medical student or a resident, a detailed mentor. This is where a faculty member needs that too. To get ready for this, you need to collect everything. CVs and calendar might be obvious, but also that list of the box under the desk. What have you thought about? All your projects you put any effort on in the last couple of years that are as yet unfinished, meaning they are not over any hurdle to either present at a meeting or you do not have a publication. Get that list together. Then you need to sit down, block out some time. I would tell you, having done this a couple of times now, we're talking about a good 2-hour span. This is not lunch. This is not 30 minutes. This is not tacked on after the faculty meeting. Sit down and plan a time to do a detailed assessment with whomever is going to be the mentor, if it's not you, of this session, and work through getting a very clearly identified picture. First and foremost, what's the future state? If you were to successfully navigate advancement to associate professor, what all does that need to look like? And then what is the real stark and honest picture of today's current state? Okay, we need those two first, and then we create a timeline. So what does the current state look like? Absolutely, go back to the guidelines. What do they say? What do they say? And then what's on the CV? So if you take a minute, on each of your tables, there's several copies of just literally the worksheet itself. We would say, hey, here's an example. Again, if you have something else in your institution, use it. But it starts at the very beginning with, what rank are we going to? What are the guidelines we need? What is the date we want to hit this with? And then where's your CV? And so what I really recommend is taking something like this, walking through, having somebody fill out that first piece of it, and then sit down together with the CV, with the guidelines, and begin to map out. Some of you may be particularly crafty, color-coded. Those folks who work with medical students, you've got the highlighters, grab it out. What roles do we have that fit each one of these things? Then look at two other categories. What are the details needed? Now, I would classify these as the things you need, but you don't have to generate, right? Or that are not necessarily new projects. Do you need a list of student evaluations or learner evaluations of your work for the last 1, 3, or 5 years? Do you need clinical evaluations of your work? Do you need letters of support outside or inside the institution? Do you need to write a formal narrative, and which narratives do you need? Make a concrete list of what are the details we need for this packet. Then go back to that, here's what we've mapped that we've done that fits our guidelines, and make a very concrete list of what are the deficits, meaning the things that this faculty member has not done that must be present to count for advancement on there. Okay, making those lists together. These are things like presentations. Have you done enough presentations at the right level, local, regional, or national, whatever your guidelines require? Do you have sufficient publications? Do you have sufficient institutional service or time and rank, right? You may have been at the institution for 7 years, but if you've only been the clerkship director for a year or only had an admin role for a year, you may not have sufficient time in the state that you need in order to go forward for that. Anything that is really things you are going to have to do more work or put more time in the space to achieve. And that gap really serves as the analysis and the crux of this. Take the unfinished projects list next, and this is everything from here's an idea, I've submitted an IRB, I've got this medical student who says they're going to write up this case report, to I've done the whole project and submitted the manuscript twice and still rejected. The whole long list. Because next we want to say, what are the deficits? What objectively do we not have? And is there anything already here? Why do we want to do that? Because if we're on a timeline, that's the double down, right? Here, you all know if we need to start a project today and we want it to count, we are months to years before it will bear fruit. But we've already got something in this list. So are there things in this list that need redirection but could potentially do this? And then there's a real place here for the coach, perhaps the coach in the chair, to sit down and have a thoughtful assessment of, given the timeline or the deadline that we're hoping to meet and the gaps we have to meet it, can we legitimately do this? Or do we need to make an administrative change and request extensions, pursue a different path? But we can't really sit that down until we say, where are we going? How far do we need to get there? And when do we expect to get there? Then I think if we say, yep, we could do this with, then you're looking at the tail end of that worksheet on the back, which is what resources do you need? This is a place where I think the coach then begins to meet with the chair and say, here's what it's going to take to help this person get over this hump in 18 months. Do we have the resources do we need? Can we pull them off of opportunities, redirect their time, send them to something else? What can we do to get them to that place? And then if we agree we're going to do it and we've got the resources, we're going to map it. We're going to map that out in a timeline. For us in our institution, that might look like a spreadsheet with dates and times of what all are we going to need to do to check this off. Excuse me, I'm having a little problem with the computer. There we go. All right. So again, with that plan, getting to that place where we say, can we meet the deadline or not? And this is not a question a junior faculty member who is going through this can answer for themselves. This is a question that's going to take some expertise, some seniority, some perspective to bring to that question. I think that junior faculty member is also going to need a lot of help saying no, because this is the time we don't say yes to anything that is not getting us to something across the finish, counts across that finish line, right? We're really going to need to say no. We're going to need to have that. We're going to need a timeline with milestones, right? That's what an IEP is for many of our learners. Here's what we're going to do, and here's when we're going to do them. And nothing else matters except this and perhaps your clinical shifts, right? I think the role for the coach here or mentor, whomever you choose to do this, needs to be accountability. This is not mentoring. We purposely put coach in there as opposed to advisor or mentoring because we're getting to that place where we've said this is a departmental asset, this person is. We're going to get them there. We want this to happen in advance for that, so we need accountability on both sides. That coach needs to hold that chair accountable of, hey, you said you'd do this for this person. You'd said you'd help them submit this, you'd cover this travel, whatever that might be. That accountability works that way, and then it also works with that junior faculty. I think if you're going to go with this model, you want to think through who that person is. This person needs time to do this role, depending on how many people they may be doing this role for. This might be anywhere, from 10 to 30, maybe 40% if you're lucky, and you can allocate that kind of time to it. This needs to be somebody senior with a lot of institutional knowledge, right? When we talk about who's the audience you're speaking to, who you're advocating for, you need somebody who knows that firsthand and can help that junior faculty member really understand, hey, on the promotion committee right now, there are 4 pharmacologists and 1 person from cell biology. We need to reframe this. They won't see you like I want you seen. And somebody who's got experience and is willing to give critical feedback and absolutely advocate for that faculty member. There are a couple of resources Nancy's going to talk about if you don't know that this exists inside your institution or you're looking for some help outside.
Hi there. Maybe I'll use this instead because I'm very short. So my name is Nancy Kwan. I'm currently the vice chair of Emergency Medicine, Long Island Jewish Medical Center, which is part of Northwell Health. And a couple of things that I just want to say about my background, so you understand where I'm coming from, is that I think probably a little over 10 years ago, I was an assistant professor. I really never thought that I would necessarily advance at the time period that I was. And, over the last greater than 10 years, I went to associate professor and professor. And I think for all of you, just being here at SAEM is a first step. So I think just the collaboration, the networking, being able to work with other people, not necessarily from your institution, is huge. So I think you're already on the path to success by being here. And just to give an example, so Lee Patterson, Luann Lawson, I did not know them well a few years ago. So we met through SAEM and through the SAEM Faculty Development Committee, which currently I'm the chair of. And I became the chair because I was involved in SAEM, and I found a lot of value in it. And I think, not to sound like an advertisement, because I'm not getting paid to advertise SAEM, but SAEM really was one of the key factors why I was promoted from assistant professor to associate professor, and then to professor. So in the few years that I've gotten to know Lee and Luann, we've actually given a few talks together, developed a few talks together. So I think that kind of collaboration, whatever your discipline or area of expertise is really going to help you develop that at places like SAM or even other organizations as well. So with regards to, the other thing, by the way, that background-wise, that I understand sort of the promotions process is that in our Zucker School of Medicine, I have sat on the Appointments and Promotions Committee. So as one of the first group of people that they allowed associate professors to review other associate professors, I couldn't review professors. And then afterwards, I sat on for 3 years, sat on for an additional 3 years, really began to understand what it takes to become an associate professor and then a professor. And on the very last meeting of my 6-year term, I became a professor. So, I think there's a lot to learn as to what you need. And there are some pitfalls that people have made. So I know one prior faculty member who had probably at this point 40 years of experience had a CV that was like 30 plus pages long, but everything was done at Northwell. So had great education, a lot of talks, was very well respected, but all of his experience was within Northwell. And I think, unfortunately, nobody guided him. He thought that he could get promoted he was an assistant professor to associate professor, and was very disappointed when he found out that that wouldn't happen. So I think that's what we don't want to happen to all of you who are so talented in your areas of expertise. SAM does have a lot of resources. So this is on the website, the SAM consultation service. So there's faculty development consultation and research consultation. I don't know how robust this is right now, but one of the things that we are trying to developing actually, AWEM currently has a letter writers bureau, and we are partnering with AWEM to create one on the faculty development website as well. So if anybody here is an associate professor or a professor and is willing to give service to this, I think, needed resource, please let us know. And I think that Letter Writers Bureau, in conjunction with AWEM, will sit on the website at some point. If any of you ever need help, like for somebody to look at your CV to get some guidance, I think the Faculty Development Committee would like to be a resource for that in the future. So reach out to me at any time.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. For this next section, what we would really like for you to do is on each of your tables, there should be, I think, 3 or 4 copies of a CV of a junior faculty member. It's been de-identified, but I would like for you, we're going to walk around and give you a hand with this. If you would take one of those worksheets, think about your own promotion guidelines. If you're not familiar, take a minute, grab your phone and Google them from your institution. But take a look at what advancement guidelines that you have that you think, hey, this is what I'd be judged against. Take a look at the CV, and we'll map out where some deficits might be for this person relative to your institution if they were getting advanced for your institution. Assume for a minute it's May, it's the end of the year, and we start this on a July 1 calendar, that this person is saying, hey, I want to go up, and I think 1 to 2 years. I'd like to see if I could go up for associate professor.
There's some extra chairs over here, too.
So we'll take about 10, 15-ish minutes, and then we'll come around. If you want to walk around that. Okay, let's circle back for a few minutes. I'm not sure what's getting moved up there, guys, but there seems to be some movement behind us or ahead of us. All right, let's regroup back again. I think we've got a couple of microphones in the room, so we'll move them around to kind of answer your question. So first thoughts, taking a look at this. So we've got Dr. Minerva, who would like to be considered for advancement in rank from assistant to associate professor, thinking about 2 years of deadlines, 1 to 2 years of deadlines. If you looked at your own advancement guidelines, took that CV, what are your first thoughts about details and deficits that she might have if she were going up at your institution?
In terms of being able to go up for an advancement, I mean, I definitely see that there is not as many publications, which tends to be something that needs to be there to go up for associate. The other thing is a lot of this work is a lot older. So in terms of the involvement in organizations and stuff like that, and the CV itself seems to be, I guess, not organized in a way that I'm used to seeing. So you're almost kind of hunting for where certain committee involvement is located on here.
So this person is not tenure track faculty. This person is a clinical track faculty member. So her requirements are going to be different to go up for promotion. She actually meets a lot of the requirements to go up on the clinical track because she's not on a timeline. It says you have to check the boxes, not the timeline in which you have to check the boxes. The thing that we really would need to know about her is what is the feedback that she's been getting on the things that she's been teaching and on the things that she's been doing in terms of her service and her QI work. But from a publications and a scholarly activity standpoint, I actually think she checks the box because she has 2 publications and she has 3 grants, which is more than I would believe the requirement at our institution would be from a scholarly activity standpoint to get promoted. So she actually would either make it or she would be really close on a clinical track.
So let's unpack a couple of those things there. Number one, which guideline is this person being considered for? Which guideline is this person being considered for? Now, for this exercise, we asked you to pull up your guidelines and take a look at what you have, because for most of you, you're going back to those institutions to work with people using those, but which guidelines are you advancing on, right? If this person is advancing on a tenure track, I think it's pretty universally accepted, we'd be expecting some threshold of publication. If this person is being advanced on an educator's track, what does that track set of guidelines look like for you? Is it a project-based set of guidelines? Meaning that, let's say you're a clerkship director and you have done an overhaul of your clerkship. You have done, if you're a medical director and you're on a clinical track and you have done an overhaul of a clinical project, you have done a series of clinical guidelines for your institution with outcomes that might not necessarily be published, but you've done the work we've decided to recognize. What do your guidelines say? What do your guidelines say? So if this person is on a track and you're looking, not knowing what each of your guidelines are, on an educator's track, we have projects. We have some publications, we have publications with learners. You may not know that looking at a CV, but they're publications with learners, but we have projects in there. The second thing is, what is our timeline that we're thinking about? And if we're close, the point is, how close are we? We have to know what our guidelines are to say that from the beginning. A couple of other things, I think, when you look at this and look at those deficits, without knowing what the guidelines require, you wouldn't know, hey, what if I had do I have enough learner feedback for this space? If you look at that guy, the CV, I think there are a host of different ways to do that. Does your institution require your CV to follow a specific form or format, right? If you don't, there's nothing wrong with it. If you do, and it's not in guidelines, it's going to stick out like a sore thumb when it comes to a committee and steps outside of it. So what does it do? That's again, it all matters, but it doesn't all count. What counts for your sets of guidelines? Do we need to have that going forward or not? So as you go through and you take a look at length of service, leadership in the role, time in the role, again, you can't answer that unless you know what it is she or he is expected to do in that space. What would you say if we said, hey, this person's close to being advanced as a teacher, but they need, for example, another publication, a presentation at a meeting, or 2 presentations at a meeting, maybe more time in the role? What would you ask for them if you were advocating for them? Or whomever supervises them. For most of us, it's probably a chair. Okay, let me give you a hint. Money, you're going to ask me for some money. If you're like my faculty, you're going to ask for some support here. So one thing that you can ask for that is you can say, hey, we don't have this unfinished list of projects. I can tell you that we need a presentation and we have a educational project on evaluating learners in our clinical space on focused documentation review. So what are you going to ask that chair for? We're going to ask that chair for a little bit of time. Is there any administrative role we could take off this person's plate? Could I get an internal resource to help them write that up and present it? And then could I get some funding? If I can help them get this accepted at a regional conference, are you going to guarantee they can get there to get the presentation done? Absolutely, that's an ask you're going to make. You're going to put that in that last section when you talk about sort of deadlines and resources. You need some help getting this person there. You need some help getting this person to that meeting to present. If that set of clinical guidelines has presentations in that, if that set of clinical guidelines has manuscripts in that, what resources do you have in your institution that would be helpful to that person? Writing consultation, if you're in any way affiliated with a medical school that has a larger university, there's going to be writing consultative services there. There's going to be help from graduate school. There's going to be somebody else who can help this person write that manuscript if you don't have that resource in the department. Is your chair willing to pony up and get you some of those resources or not in that? Let's say this person needs 2 or 3 publications, and we really are looking at a tenure track. What would we do with them? For those of you who are a little more senior in the room, could we take somebody who needs 3 publications up for tenure in 2 years, up for advancement in 2 years? Why is it tight?
Well, it would take some time for the project to get done. The person has to, if they don't have the skill set to do some of the work for the writing and the stats and all that, or at least the design, that would take, that would take some time, and then writing takes time. Getting accepted takes time. And by the time everything's published, you would think that that person has to work on 3 different things at once. I would think that that would be tough.
Okay, go ahead. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
I was just going to say, although several of these, like the research experience section, there's like somebody mentioned the quality improvement project, there's a radiographic, like appendicitis thing. There's several things here that you could just turn out, like produce a manuscript, and you could work with other people, recruit like a resident or another faculty member or something to kind of collaborate on with this. And it's not starting the project from scratch. If your timeline's 2 years, just take something you've already done and turn it into an academic product,
So that timeline's tight because of all the things that you said. We have to think about that deadline. Then we have to work back to all the deadlines that go up into that. That's part of that coaching process. Let me help you see what all the deadlines are. Because if I graph that out for you and say, hey, you do have 3 projects on here. You do have 3 things we could get there. But we might not be able to do it in 2 years. Let's renegotiate that timeline. That's a really good time to say, hey, let's renegotiate the timeline. Let's get somebody to advocate for that into that space. And then let's critically look at what you have done in that list of projects and ask ourselves all of the details. Where would we get it published? Who else can write it with you? How far along is it? Is this a manuscript you wrote and it's been sitting there for a while, so we have a whole lot to work with? Is this something that a resident wrote, and we need to go back and find that resident or student that did that project with you? That kind of level of detail is what it needs, and then we're asking ourselves, can we hit that deadline? And if we can't, what do we need to do to get to that deadline? And I think if we were saying this person needs to go up for tenure, that might take 3 more papers, we have more than 2 years. If this person doesn't need to go that far forward and is in with actual manuscripts but needs presentations, needs a better narrative articulating what it is they've done, then we may have that right timeline. Does that begin to make sense to people, sort of how concretely to think about it? All right, go.
Opportunities to double dip too. So like if you're developing curriculum, you could really actually write a manuscript about your outcomes related to whatever intervention you plan. And then you could also publish the curriculum itself on like Meta Portal. So you could really take the same project and get 2 manuscripts out of that.
And I think we had mentioned, Dr. Patterson had mentioned earlier about unfinished projects. So timing is really important. So if you see, one of the things, in reviewing with CVs that I see is that, so there's some research projects that are there, but if we're talking that this is current, and right now we're in 2024, and this was a retrospective chart review that was done in 2017 to 2018, it may not be relevant anymore. So really being able to follow through and complete those projects in that timely fashion would be really important. So sometimes that's like a red flag if you see like there's these research projects that were started, but it didn't follow through to a publication.
Yeah, would
Yes.
you even include these projects on your lists? I mean, something like that first one was voluntarily withdrawn, and then the other one was like 6 years ago, they got already approved and they go any further. It just seems like.
So I think that's a great question. Would you include some of that or not? This has been highly altered to reflect that. One of the things I would say is that in this, I would sit down and ask a lot of questions about what might not be on this CV2. Not just what have we left in there, but maybe we've left things off. Sorry about that. That is terribly distracting. What's left off of that? What also didn't get included that we do need to be highlighting? There are a number of student mentees that are not listed, and one thing that might better represent a teacher, an educator for advancement on what might be an education track is how many students have you contacted? How many students have direct face-to-face contact with you? And that might be a better sell than a project that you started that everyone has done where they've started, not finished, or it's not advanced in some way, shape, or form. So I would sit down and go look at both of that of, is there something we want to take out of here? But are we absolutely sure we haven't overlooked the 20 students you have directly mentored over a decade? Yeah, I would look for both of those things.
Well, my institution wants me to put the number of hours that I spend doing direct care with a resident. And because like internal medicine will round with residents for 2 hours in the morning, and then they're, I don't know where they are.
Right.
And then in here, like I spend my whole shift like talking to the resident.
Right.
And here, I don't even see a mention of working alongside residents. This could be a person that doesn't even work with residents, works in a standalone ER all day with nurse practitioners or something.
So I think that's a great point of, again, are you articulating all of your narrative? Are you putting everything else in there? What counts? If what counts for your university is time in contact with learners, we could absolutely add that in. It doesn't, you can add certainly more than your university counts if they don't, to try to help your committee, in whether it's internal or external, see that. It's interesting that you have to log all of that. Are you logging that for advancement? Or are you logging that for annual reports?
Yeah, no, I log that. Like when you go for advancement, you put the number of hours, they multiply it by, they give a multiplier, and it's the number of points. And they add up all the points from all your categories, and they have to be above a certain number.
That's it.
Very prescriptive.
Sure.
No, I was just going to say that there are not a lot of programs are like that. You know, others are just like, was your paper cool?
Subjective versus objective, yes. Yes, you're describing a criterion referenced objective set of metrics that says if you hit the score, this is what you're going to get. Pluses to that as well. And the chair in me is like, oh yeah, that's going to incentivize somebody to pick up those shifts with the interns. Good job. I can see the positive incentive in that. Of yes, you let me help you see the benefits of working with a junior learner. Yeah, that's interesting. Other things people have when you go back and look at yours. Yes.
I was thinking about, as you're talking about, could we turn this around to get 3,000 in 2 years? Maybe you can, but what is the journal that's going to accept it and turn it around quickly? And if you're looking at tenure track, is that going to meet the bar for the tenure track, or are they still not going to count?
Right.
So getting good mentorship around that is important as well.
Right. And again, I harp on this, but going back to the guidelines of, do your guidelines specify your journals? In our institution, these guidelines are first written at the departmental level, and different departments have wildly different expectations of the journals in which you publish, and whether or not an impact factor is considered or not, you know. Yeah.
I think one of the things that senior people in the room can help impact, particularly chairs and the likes. For those people who have written letters, it is not uncommon for them to ask the question, would this person be advanced at your institution? Which is also really when we've already seen how vastly different our own guidelines are.
In terms of, two comments I wanted to make in terms of like publications too. So in reviewing CVs, some of the things that appointments and promotions committees also look at is like, and people write this in their letters, was the person the first author or last author, right? Because that means that they were kind of like the leader or the mentor on it. With regards to people that you mentor, the list of students, especially in education, I think it's important. It's not going to be the main thing that gets you over the line to associate professor or professor, but it is impactful. And I think even maybe junior faculty don't think about putting that on their CV, but even as a junior faculty member, because I see some of my junior faculty members who are here today, you are oftentimes mentoring people who are residents, and you don't think about putting that on your CV or advising them, and you can put that on your CV if you're truly doing it, and then that longitudinal list of mentees really like grows over the years in your career.
I just want to make a plug for, especially for sort of junior education faculty here. You will occasionally get really thoughtful thank you notes from your learners or your mentees. You should scan all of those because it just makes it so much easier to show your impact on individual learners when you're going up from especially the assistant to associate professor. It's just like all right there, you just take that folder and then it's right there in your addendum of exhibits and looks so powerful.
That's a great idea.
So we're going to take the last few minutes. I think we're going to try to take a last few. We have another CV, somebody who might be wanting to consider going forward from associate to full professor. So we'll take just a minute to take a look at that. It's a little bit, I know we've got about 5 minutes left, but we want to highlight a couple of things to think about when you look at this. I think we may be running into the next group, so I'll just call attention to what we wanted to highlight here. And there's some examples, if you look at the publications in this section, where this person who is a clinician, maybe not practicing emergency medicine as we are, but a clinician has taken their educational work, educational responsibility, and mapped that into publications. They have written about what they do, they've written with other educators, and we're able to take that forward to get promotion to associate. But if you look at that, it's getting time to be thinking about full professor. I think we're probably running short on time to really do a deeper dive into what it might be to go to associate or full. But just a few thoughts we really wanted to highlight, kind of back looking at that scholarship. Kind of to close this a little bit, to finish those times, I've said it, I'll say it again, know your guidelines. Know your guidelines. Be sure if you are working with someone that they are looking at the correct guidelines to which they are adhered. Absolutely. If you are in this role, recruit a coach. Be sure that you've got somebody dedicated to help you with this and think hard about those gaps. And finally, in conclusion, I would also like to thank Dr. Jennifer Milliman from Ohio State. She was instrumental in sort of a first iteration we developed in giving this talk, I think, 2 years ago. So we'll also like to give her some credit for sort of this work. I think she's wonderful, a resource for folks as well. But in order to keep on time, thank you all very much for giving us some of your time today, and we'll kind of be in the back for a few minutes for any last questions.